Okay, you know, Rabbi say in Yiddishkeit, names are not just simply a combination of a few letters put together, but rather they have actual meaning itself. And not only do they have meaning, a name often is a description and can actually define a person's essence. They bring down that one of the only times that a parent actually has Ruach HaKodesh is when he wants to name his child. That you get a spark of Ruach HaKodesh, and sometimes afterwards you can actually see years later that the pshat in the name fits the boy, fits the girl. It's a tremendous, tremendous thing. And that's why I thought, you know, at this moment of time, before Be'ezus Hashem, I get the opportunity of naming my son, which is tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem. So I want to discuss a little bit about names to understand, because a lot of people think, okay, names, I got this name, I got that name. Be'ezus Hashem, all of you, at the right time, Be'itu Bizmane, are going to get married and have children, B'siyatu Dishmaya, Be'ezus Hashem. And it's taka schus to have a child. It's a schus. It's not something which, you know, we should be taken for granted, and it's an unbelievable schus. It really is. I cannot actually explain to you the feeling of you know, being in the hospital and your wife giving birth and the baby comes out, and it's just, I honestly cannot explain to you the feeling of gratitude to the Ribbono Shel Olam is something indescribable. You just can't describe what it means to thank the Ribbono Shel Olam that you have a beautiful, healthy child. It is just unbelievable, right? So any parent, Be'ezus Hashem, you'll know this, Be'ezus Hashem, at the right time, but every parent knows and understands that it's a huge schus, and it's a tremendous, tremendous debt of gratitude that you have to the Ribbono Shel Olam for giving you that child. And now you want to name that child. So how does it work? You just like pick a nice name, I like that name, so I'll just pick a couple of names. It doesn't work that way, right? Sometimes you have a name to name after, whether it be a parent, Rahman al-Islam, at that young age, or whether it's a grandparent, a great-grandparent, an uncle, or someone similar to that, or whether you don't have a name, but you just want to choose a name. As I mentioned, it's a time of special siyat d'shmaya that a parent has. But I want to discuss now exactly the inyan of names. The Arizal brings down that the nature of a person's behavior, good or bad, can actually be analyzed in his name in the correct way. Sometimes the gematria of his name will add up to certain character traits, and it can actually really have, many years later, can have an effect on the person, which is why sometimes it's important to understand the meaning of the name. Every single one of you have beautiful names, and your parents chose your beautiful names, and often it actually defines your essence. We can see a person act in a certain way because of his name. Okay? Now, the Medrash tells us like this, Rabbi Isai. The Medrash says that listen to this Medrash, it's absolutely unbelievable, okay? It's a very, very important Medrash, and you should remember this Medrash. Yalkut Shimoni. The Yalkut Shimoni brings down that if future generations would have had the schus, then the Ribbono Shel Olam himself, b'chvoid v'atzmai, would have given the names to every one of his children, because we find that the Ribbono Shel Olam gave names to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shlomo Melech, and others as well. However, that isn't the case. I guess we don't have the schos, but we have enough of the schos that the parent, as I said to you before, gets a little bit of siyata d'shmaya to name that child in that way. Now the Gemara tells us a very interesting thing, okay? The Gemara Yuma Pei Gimel Amud Aleph tells us the following story. Listen to this story. It happened to Reb Meir, Reb Yosi, and Reb Yehuda. They were looking to go and rent like a little hotel, and they found a hotel for Shabbos. So Reb Meir was known to pay very close attention to the names of people. And when he learned that the innkeeper's name was Kidur, that's what the Gemara tells us, the innkeeper's name was Kidur, and I'm pronouncing it correctly, so he brought up to mind the pasuk that refers to untrustworthy people. So as a result, Reb Meir basically refused to trust the innkeeper with his wallet, which is what they used to do in the old days. When you got to a place, you always give the innkeeper your purse. So he said no, because I look at his name, and that shows his essence, and his essence is a not upstanding, correct person. I'm not going to trust him with my purse. Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda, who didn't really pay too much attention to names like Reb Meir did, they gave their money trusted to the innkeeper. What happened was, is the innkeeper eventually, the Gemara tells us, refused to give back the money of that he was given by Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi, but Rabbi obviously, who didn't give it to him, was saved. So you see already the Gemara tells us that he looked into the name and he saw the essence. So when you have a name, the name can identify who that person is. The Zoya asks the question of Shimon Bar Yochai, does that mean a person doesn't have free will? That what do you mean? If my parents gave me a certain name, that's who I am and I can't change it and therefore I don't have free will? And the Zoya says, no, absolutely not. It has no connection to free will, and the names of people that choose to be tzaddikim can still be tzaddikim, and those that choose to be, unfortunately, the other way can also be that way. But it means that the name has the potential. It means that the name that you has a particular potential. The Heilige Noam Elimelech from Nizhensk writes as follows, that he writes that that it says that the neshama of a person is called and referred to with names. That means the name that you were given at your bris is the name that in Shamayim they refer to your neshama. Some of the Sfarim HaKadoshim bring down that the higher the neshama comes to a child when he's given his name. Right, that's what happens at that time. The Noam Elimelech explains that this is exactly the reason when a person is sleeping, it's much more difficult to awaken him by shaking his body. How do you wake someone up in a much more effective way? By calling his name, because that's his neshama. And when he's sleeping, his neshama's gone up to Shamayim. When you call his name, his real name, so his neshama hears the calling and come back down into the guf. And so you state the Noam Elimelech, which means, again, you see this again, the name is the essence of a person. It's the neshama of a person. It's a real thing. Now, just to give you a few ideas. First of all, naming after living people. Do we name babies after? Somebody actually came to the Shalom Zacha and he told me that he had a brother who had a baby, and this brother named his son after him. If don't say the name, please, because it's being recorded and I don't think he wants everyone to know about it. We'll do it after the share. Anyway, so he named his child, his brother named his child after him.
If you try to get, let's say, the guy out, you call his nickname.
Right. No. The nickname is just a name that you happen to give him. It's not when you think someone up, you say his full Hebrew name, for sure. Right. Well, that's what he's named. He happens to be known as that anyway. Right. No, but like you always say that. Yeah. When we say names over here, by the way, let's make this clear. We don't mean nicknames. We mean Yiddish Shenomen. Yiddish Shenomen. The name you were given. The name you were given at your bris is your Yiddish Shenomen. Okay, so Rabbi side, there's a difference between... One second, Rabbi, let's get back on track over here. Now, there is a difference in opinion between the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim. The Sfardim consider it to be a segula la'arichas yomim, when you name a child after a living person, and they have a minhag to name a child after a living, either father or grandfather. That's what it is. Now, the Gemara... One second, let's get to a few more Makomos. We'll take questions maybe afterwards, because we've got a lot to get to. There's a Gemara in Chulin Mem Zayin. The Gemara in Chulin tells us a story about a distraught mother who was very nervous about having a bris milah on her son, because there was a history of illness in the family, and she was very nervous. If I give my son a bris milah, who knows what's going to happen to him? And there's a bit of a history of illness in the family, and doing a bris milah is, after all, a medical procedure, right? He is going to be losing blood, and it's difficult, and she was very, very nervous about it. The bris was delayed until Reb Nosson Abavli said that it was safe to perform the bris, and to show gratitude, she named the baby after him. Right, and he was alive. So you see already from the Gemara that there is such a mahalach of naming a baby. There's a famous letter, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, from the Ramban. The Ramban wrote a letter to his son and his daughter-in-law. Right, his daughter-in-law was the daughter of Rabbeinu Yoina. Okay, so we're dealing with very Rosh Yidden over here. When they had a baby, so Rabbeinu Yoina was nifta a month before the birth of the baby boy. And the Ramban says, even though it's right for you to name the child after me, because I'm the father's father, I'm the grandfather basically, and I'm alive, really you should name it after me, but I defer the honor to Rabbeinu Yoina, and therefore you should name it after him. But again, you see from there another makara to name a child after someone that is living. Rabbi Yosef Kairai, the Heilige Shulchan Aruch, buried in Sfas, was named after his grandfather, who became his Rebbe, who was alive at the time. Now, the minhag of Ashkenazim is not that way. As we know, the minhag of Ashkenazim is not to name after living people, and it's based on a Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid writes in the Sefer Hasidim that even though Goyim name their children after themselves, and no harm befalls them, Yidden should refrain from doing so. And some people actually say pshat, they say for Hasidim already, that somebody say if you name your child after someone living, you're basically waiting for him to die, and that's why and what it is. They did it in the time of the Tanoim and the Amoraim in the Gemara. It was because they had so much Torah and so much Chusim, Memeda, they weren't scared of any harm, as I state in the Tshuva in the Chalkes Yaakov in Siman Kuv Chof. Now, naming a child after someone that died a young age, right? Always a question. So the Marshal brings down that the reason that we name people Yeshaya instead of Yeshayahu is because Yeshayahu was killed. So we'll call someone Yeshaya, and therefore we try not to name someone after someone that was actually killed. This is the Yam Shloim in Gittin Pei Daled Siman Lamed Aleph. The Chassam Sofer brings down that the name Akiva should properly be spelled Akiva with a hey and not with an aleph. And he says that since Rabbi Akiva was, as we know, tortured Asar Arugi Malchus, and that we changed the name slightly by changing the last letter, by naming the child after Rabbi Akiva in that case. But Lamaisa, even if that's true, many people still have a minute to spell the name Akiva with an aleph over there. Moving on, Rabbi Isai. So it goes like this. Regarding to someone, so what people generally do is, regarding someone that died young, is they either change the name slightly or add an additional name, so as not to keep that name, because we don't want to have that. What's that? What you nickname the child has no relevance to what we're discussing. The bris milah. Bris milah is what we're discussing, because that's the name he's going to be called up to the Torah. That is his name. What you decide to call the name afterwards is totally up to you, your wife, and if you've got teenage children like I do, your kids as well. You've got to bring into the conversation for some interesting reason. They're going to kill me for saying that. But anyway, that's just how it is, right? Used to be easy, you decide a name, your wife, you sit down, you figure out the name. Now you got to discuss it with the Yal has to make her decision, the Sagi has to get her decision, and even Eddie sometimes comes up with what he decides should be the right name. But anyway, we'll shock them all tomorrow morning with like a no shaykh. Anyway, but what? Anyway, Yiddish names. What about Yiddish names? Is there? That's a good question. That's a very good question. What would be considered young would be what the Olam considers young. Meaning when people say, wow, he was young. Do you know what I mean? If somebody dies at 98 years old, now that's young, because Be'etzim meant to live to 120. But in our generations, that's considered to be old. We don't consider it to be... We'd love him to live at, another 122 years, whatever. But another 22 years. But Akoponim, I think young would probably be considered what the Olam considers to be young. Right? Or someone that died before his predestined time, which is not really true, because he was died exactly at the right time. But Al Capone, you get what I'm saying. Now, Yiddish names, first of all, naming after tzaddikim, right? Naming after tzaddikim. I'm telling you all these things now because Be'ez Hashem, when the time comes, you're not going to have time to start, going through the whole sugya. So at least you have a little bit of a preparation now. The Noam Elimelech brings down that a person should always name his child after a tzaddik. Right? Because a child that's named after a person that's dead, the neshama of the nifta is aroused. And there's a spiritual connection between the neshama of the newborn and the neshama of the tzaddik, which has an effect on the child. And therefore that's why a person has to be careful not to use a name of a Rasha. Right? Chazal tell us, by the way, that one of the reasons that we were saved from Mitzrayim, these parashas, is because we didn't shaloshim neshamam, we didn't change their names. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, Yiddish names, right? Many people, apart from a Hebrew name, have a Yiddish name, right? For example, Dov Bear, right? That's Yiddish. Zev Wolf, Tzvi Hirsch, Aryeh Leib, all of these things. And right, there's no problem with any of these names. Obviously, they're beautiful names. And again, the Hebrew one generally goes before the Yiddish one in that case. What about names used by Goyim?
Could you give a Yiddish name to call the guy to the Torah?
If that's his name, sure, Aryeh Leib. Dov Bear. It's all Yiddish. Dov Bear. By his, whatever he was called by his bris.
How did they call him up?
Shlomo Dov.
Why didn't Shlomo Ber?
We named him after Shlomo Dov, so that's why he's called Shlomo Dov. That's my Shvez's father, Shlomo Dov. Anyway, so moving on. Goyish names. It's a very important topic, this one. Goyish names. The Medrash tells us that in the schus of 4 things, Klal Yisrael was redeemed from Mitzrayim. The first one is they didn't change their name. They also didn't change their language. They didn't tell everyone the secrets, and they weren't involved with znus. In fact, the Maram Shik paskins that if a person calls his child by a goyish name, he actually is over on the issa of chukosechem lo salecho. He's being referred to by a goyish name in that case. In fact, it's interesting. They say that when they forced the Maram Shik's father to adopt a secular surname, he chose Shik, because the Rosh Tevas of the name Shik are Shem Yisrael Kodesh. This was known as the Maram Shik. You know that? Shem Yisrael Kodesh. Right? So he got that name in order for that way. Rav Moshe has a tshuva, and Rav Moshe says that even though it's improper for a person to have a goyish name, however, he does bring down something. He says there's no issa in having one. Obviously, you don't call up your child to the bris by that or by the Torah, but sometimes on people's passports for the sake of simplicity when dealing with business or when dealing with goyim, whatever it is. So sometimes people do have a goyish name. So Rav Moshe says there's no issa b'chalal for a person to have that. The Medrash. The Medrash was talking about a situation with Koydem Matan Torah. It was a time when the Yidden were obligated in Sheva mitzvahs to Bnei Noach, and they were putting over there, and therefore all sorts of different things apply over there. And therefore that's why a person should never name a child after a goy, even if the name is a Jewish name over there. In fact, just one last thing, a very interesting thing. Alexander the Great. It's interesting. Alexander stems from a goy. Alexander the Great, it was a goy, right? So Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes that everything Chazal did and everything they said was so much clearness, and he points that even though we find that the name Alexander mentions in Shas, we never find it written as Alexander. It's always written Alexandri with the Yud, and he says that the gematria of Alexandri with the Yud at the end is the same as Shloima, being 375, and even though it seems that Klal Yisrael were naming their children after Alexander the Great, they were actually naming after their children after Shloima HaMelech. That's what it was over there. Now, who chooses the name? Who chooses the name? Nicknames is not a problem. Again, we're not talking about nicknames. Nicknames, you have to be very careful of nicknames. The Gemara Bava Metzia says, right, they have to be very careful of nicknames. Some of them don't nickname someone in a derogatory fashion because you can call them Onas Devorim and you'll be very pained by that. But if his name is, I don't know. I'm trying to find a nickname, right? Let's say Nosson Meir, and they call him Natan. So nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. His name is Nosson Meir. Everyone knows his name is Nosson Meir, highly genomen. But Al Kaponim, right, named after the Mashkiach, right? Tzaddik, your neshama, the Mashkiach's neshama is definitely, in some ways, tied up. They say he was very chassidish, I think, no? Anyway, who gets to choose the name? Who gets to choose the name, Rabbi Say? Okay? Okay. All right. Who gets to choose the name? This is a very sensitive topic. Who gets to choose the name? So the minhag of Ashkenazim is that the mother has the right to name the first child, and the right to name all the other children is alternated between the two parents, meaning the father names the second, the mother names the third, until you get to number 14, and then by then you run out of names already. But that's what it is. That's what it is. Now, obviously, if there's a parent or grandparent that was nifta, then obviously you're going to go with that. The Sfarim HaKadoshim bring down, by the way, that if it's going to cause an argument, then it's better, to just let whoever it is. I think they bring down from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky's Zetzel that when they asked Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky once by Chasana, because there's always a shaila who walks down the chosin. Is it the parents, meaning each parent walks down their child, or is it the two fathers or two mothers? There's a different minhagim in Klal Yisrael. So they asked Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, because he was Masada Kedushin, I think it was his child's wedding, and a son and his daughter, whatever, one of his children, and they asked him, the other mechutin asked, what's your minhag when it comes to this thing? And he said, my minhag is whatever the mechutin does. In other words, I don't want to get involved in machlokes because whatever you do, it's fine with me. So I think when it comes to naming children, and again, it's a sensitive thing. People get very heated up about it, worked up about it. I think the perspective over here is to do the Ratzon Hashem, and if it's going to cause an argument, shalom bias between you and your wife, or you and your mother-in-law, or father-in-law. So I don't think it's kedai to do that, and of course to have them in mind and be sensitive to what they would want as well. And I think that's very, very choshev to show them the covet and respect. You're not meant to ask them, but sometimes you know what they would prefer, what they wouldn't prefer. It doesn't mean you have to follow what they're saying. It's your child. But to have that in mind, I think it's a very, very important thing that a person has to realize that at the end of the day, that's what it is. But we do have to remember how very, very important this is, that names mean a lot to people. It means very, very choshev. You shouldn't do that, no. You should try to call a name that was done by tzaddikim, was by an ancestor or something like that. But so the truth is there's a lot more to discuss over here, but I'm not going to go into too much. There's so much more to discuss, but I just wanted to give you just an idea into what it means, a name and the essence of a person. And Be'ez Hashem, we shall, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow to join us by the bris.